We all know the story. David and Goliath. The little shepherd boy against the massive champion. It's the ultimate underdog story. It's the go-to metaphor for any time a small startup takes on a corporate giant or a tiny team faces a powerhouse in the playoffs. We tell it to our kids to teach them that size doesn't matter, that courage can conquer anything. Face your fears, slay your giants, and that's a good story. It's inspiring. But it might not be the real story. What if we've been telling it wrong? What if the lesson we're supposed to learn isn't about the power of the underdog? What if David was never the underdog to begin with? If we strip away the layers of tradition and myth, if we look at the raw text in the first book of Samuel, a different picture emerges. It's a story that's more complex, more strategic, and far more useful than the simple fairy tale we've turned it into. The real story isn't about blindly running at your problems with a brave heart. It's about something else entirely. It's about perspective, preparation, and the profound power of refusing to play by someone else's rules. To understand what really happened in the Valley of Elah, we have to start by looking at the giant himself. Let's really look at Goliath. The Bible gives us his specs. He was huge. Depending on the manuscript you read, he was somewhere between 6'9" and 9'9". Let's just agree he was enormous, a mountain of a man. His armor was insane. A bronze helmet, a coat of mail that weighed over 100 pounds, bronze greaves on his leg, a bronze javelin strapped to his back. His spear was like a weaver's beam, its iron point alone weighing 15 pounds. This was a walking tank. The Israelite army saw him, and they were, in the words of the text, dismayed and terrified. For 40 days he came out and taunted them, and for 40 days they did nothing. They were paralyzed by his appearance, they saw his strength, and assumed it was unbeatable. But what if Goliath's great strength was also his great weakness? Think about it. All that armor, probably close to 200 pounds of metal, makes you incredibly powerful, but it also makes you incredibly slow. He was built for one kind of fight at close quarters, hand-to-hand brawl, where he could use his massive size and heavy weaponry to overwhelm an opponent. He was an infantryman, a warrior designed for static, brutal combat. He couldn't pivot quickly. He couldn't chase anyone down. His entire strategy depended on his enemy agreeing to come close and fight him on his terms. For 40 days, everyone was too scared to do that. They accepted his terms, but were too afraid to engage. There's also a compelling medical theory, popularized by the writer Malcolm Gladwell, that Goliath may have had a condition called acromegaly. It's a benign tumor on the pituitary gland that causes an overproduction of human growth hormone. It leads to gigantism. It also often comes with a major side effect vision problems. People with acromegaly frequently suffer from double vision or severe nearsightedness. Suddenly, some odd details in the biblical text start to make sense. Why was Goliath led onto the battlefield by an attendant? The text says a shield bearer went ahead of him. A warrior this mighty, this confident, needed someone to guide him. It's possible. And then there's his famous taunt to David. When he sees the young shepherd approaching with a staff and a sling, he says, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" Sticks. Plural. David was holding one staff. Why would Goliath see two? Perhaps he was suffering from double vision. He was squinting, trying to make out this blurry figure approaching him. He saw a boy and a couple of sticks. He was a slow-moving giant with bad eyesight. His strength was real, but it came with a hidden, fatal vulnerability. The Israelites saw a terrifying, invincible giant. They were focused on his size and his armor. They saw the legend. David saw something else. He saw a target. Now let's talk about David. We call him a shepherd boy, and that conjures up images of a gentle kid with a fluffy lamb over his shoulders. That's not what a shepherd was in ancient Israel. A shepherd in that part of the world was not a passive observer of sheep. They were rugged, tough, and resourceful. Their job was to protect the flock from predators. Not just wolves, but lions and bears. When David tries to volunteer for the fight, King Saul dismisses him. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David's response is telling. He doesn't say, "I have a lot of heart." He doesn't say, "God will protect me." He gives Saul his resume. He says, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them." This is not the speech of a frightened boy hoping for a miracle. This is the speech of an experienced fighter. He had faced deadly predators and won. But how? He didn't fist fight a lion. He used his weapon, the sling. Again, our modern image is wrong. We think of a slingshot, a forked stick with an elastic band, a child's toy. That's not what a biblical sling was. A sling was a pouch of leather or woven wool attached to two long cords. A slinger would place a stone in the pouch, swing it around their head to build up incredible momentum, and then release one cord, launching the stone at a tremendous speed. Here, this was not a toy. It was a devastatingly effective long-range weapon. Archaeologists have found sling stones from that period that are the size of a modern baseball. A skilled slinger could hurl a stone at speeds of over 100 miles per hour. The projectile force was equivalent to that of a .44 Magnum handgun. A well-aimed shot could penetrate a helmet or a shield. It was a weapon of choice for ancient armies, used to disrupt enemy formations from a distance before the infantry engaged. And David was an expert. He had spent countless hours alone in the fields, protecting his sheep. He practiced constantly. He wasn't just a shepherd. He was a projectile weapons specialist. He was a sniper. So now let's reframe the battle. This wasn't an underdog story. This was a mismatch. It was a heavily armored, slow-moving infantryman with poor eyesight going up against a nimble, long-range marksman. David had no intention of fighting Goliath on Goliath's terms. The giant wanted a sword fight. David wasn't playing that game. He was going to fight his own kind of fight. The outcome was practically decided before the first stone was thrown. David wasn't the underdog. He was the one with the superior technology and the superior strategy. Everyone else was terrified because they were thinking about fighting Goliath with a sword. And David knew better. But the story gets even more interesting, because the physical battle in the valley is almost an afterthought. The real fight, the one that contains the most profound lessons, happens before David even picks up a stone. It's the battle he fights against his own people. First, he has to fight his family. When David comes down to the camp to bring his brothers some food, he hears Goliath's taunts and is outraged. He starts asking the other soldiers what the reward is for killing the Philistine. His oldest brother, Eliab, overhears him and gets angry. "Why have you come down here?" he scolds. "And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Think about that. The first person to challenge David is not the giant. It's his own brother. He's accused of being arrogant, irresponsible, and a mere spectator. He's being put back in his box. You're just a shepherd. This isn't your place. Go home. How many times do we face this? We have an idea, we see a problem that needs solving, and the first wave of resistance comes from those closest to us. They doubt us, they question our motives, they remind us of our place. David had to overcome that first. He had to believe in his own purpose when his own family did it. Next, he has to fight the king, the establishment. King Saul is desperate, but when he sees David, his first instinct is to make David into a miniature version of himself. He sees the problem, Goliath, and he sees the solution, a traditional warrior. So he tries to equip David with the traditional tools. Then Saul clothed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried to walk around because he was not used to them. This is one of the most important moments in the entire story. David is drowning in Saul's armor. It's too big. It's too heavy. He can't move. He's being asked to fight someone else's fight using someone else's tools. And he has the wisdom and the self-awareness to say no. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. This is a monumental act of courage. It's not the courage to face the giant. It's the courage to be himself. He's standing in front of the king, the most powerful man in the country, and he is rejecting the king's solution. He's rejecting the conventional wisdom. The system told him that to fight a great warrior, you must become a warrior just like him, only better. You need armor. You need a sword. David understood that this was a trap. Wearing Saul's armor wouldn't make him strong. It would make him a slow, clumsy, second-rate version of Saul. It would negate his own unique advantages. It would force him to fight Goliath on Goliath's terms, up close, where he would surely be killed. The lesson here is not just about battle strategy, it's about identity. How often are we handed Saul's armor? Well, we're told to follow a certain career path, to use a certain business model, to approach a problem in the proven way. We are encouraged to put on the armor of convention. But if that armor doesn't fit, if it's not authentic to who we are and what our unique skills are, it will not protect us. It will paralyze us. David's genius was not just in his aim with a sling, it was in his profound self-knowledge. He knew what he was good at, and he knew what he was not. He refused to be an imitation. So he walks out to face Goliath with his staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones from the stream. He has overcome the scorn of his family and rejected the ill-fitting armor of the establishment. Now he faces the giant, and this is where the third, and most important, battle takes place, the battle of perspective. So Goliath looks at David and is insulted. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" He sees a boy with primitive weapons, he sees disrespect, he curses David by his gods, he promises to feed his flesh to the birds and the wild animals. He is operating entirely within his own worldview. In his world, might makes right. Size and strength and sharp metal are what matter. He is the embodiment of worldly power. David's reply is a masterclass in reframing a conflict. He doesn't engage with Goliath's taunt on Goliath's level. He lifts the battle to an entirely different plane. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Let's be clear about what's happening here. This is not just a prayer, this is a psychological weapon. David is redefining the reality of the situation. Goliath thinks this is a fight between a giant and a boy. David says, no, you've got it all wrong. This is a fight between your gods and my God. This isn't about me, I'm just the instrument. The battle itself belongs to God. This is where faith enters the story, but not in the way we usually think. It's not about faith as a magic charm. David didn't just close his eyes and hope for the best, believing God would magically guide the stone. His faith was the source of his entire strategy. It was the lens through which he saw the world. Because David believed the battle was the Lord's, he was not intimidated by Goliath's size. From a divine perspective, what's the difference between a giant and a regular-sized man? There's nothing. They are both just men. Because he believed the battle was the Lord's, he was not impressed by Goliath's armor or weapon. What is a sword and spear against the creator of the universe? They are just pieces of metal. This perspective gave him extraordinary clarity and courage. The rest of the Israelite army was paralyzed by fear because they were comparing themselves to Goliath. They were doing the math and seeing an impossible equation. David was not comparing himself to Goliath. He was comparing Goliath to God. And from that vantage point, the giant suddenly seemed very, very small. Fear is almost always a failure of perspective. We get scared when our problem seems bigger than our resources. With David's faith gave him access to a resource that was bigger than any problem. It wasn't a substitute for his skill, it was the fuel for it. His skill with the sling was useless if he was too scared to use it. His faith conquered the fear. It allowed him to walk onto that field with a clear head and a steady hand. It allowed him to see the giant not as a monster, but as a target of opportunity. It gave him the confidence to use his own unique gifts, to trust in his years of preparation. And so the fight happens. It's almost anticlimactic. David runs toward the Philistine. He doesn't wait. He seizes the initiative. He reaches into his bag, takes out a stone, slings it, and strikes Goliath in the forehead. The stone sinks in, and the giant falls face down on the ground. It was over in an instant. David didn't need the other 4 stones. The story we tell is that the little guy won. But that's not what happened. What happened was the specialist won. The innovator won. The one who refused to play by the conventional rules won. The one who had the courage to define the conflict on his own terms came out on top. The man who saw the situation with clear eyes, unclouded by the fear that paralyzed everyone else, was victorious. So what can we learn from David and Goliath? It's not that the small and weak can miraculously beat the big and strong. The real lessons are far more practical and profound. First, we need to correctly identify our giants. We often misdiagnose their strength. We see a corporation's size, a competitor's funding, or a problem's complexity, and we become paralyzed, just like the Israelite army. We fixate on the giant's visible armor, but we fail to look for their hidden vulnerability. Is that giant corporation slow to adapt? Is that complex problem built on a flawed assumption? Like Goliath, our giants often have great strengths that mask great weaknesses. We need to stop being intimidated by the armor and start looking for the exposed forehead. Second, we have to stop seeing ourselves as underdogs. The underdog label can be a trap. It can become an excuse for not preparing, for not being strategic. David didn't see himself as an underdog. He saw himself as a skilled professional with the right tool for the job. He had put in the work. He had spent years in the wilderness honing his craft. His victory wasn't a fluke. It was the result of thousands of hours of practice meeting the perfect opportunity. We need to identify our slings, the unique skills, the unconventional talents, the things we have practiced and mastered while no one was watching. We need to have a deep and honest understanding of our own strengths and then have the courage to rely on them. Third, we must be aware of Saul's armor. It is everywhere. It is the pressure to conform, to follow the well-trodden path, to use the accepted tools even when they don't fit us. It's the temptation to become a second-rate version of someone else instead of a first-rate version of ourselves. The hardest battle is often the internal one, the one where we find the courage to say, I cannot go in these. True success is found not in adopting someone else's strength, but in weaponizing our own. Finally, the story teaches us about the power of perspective. David's faith wasn't a passive hope, it was an active way of seeing. It reframed his reality. It allowed him to see Goliath not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity for God to be glorified, for the world to see that there are different kinds of power. Our worldview, our core beliefs, these are not soft, abstract ideas. They are the ultimate strategic advantage. They determine what we see as a threat and what we see as an opportunity. They govern our fear and fuel our courage. When our perspective is right, when we see the battle as belonging to a cause larger than ourselves, it gives us the clarity to act boldly and creatively when others are frozen in fear. The story of David and Goliath endures not because it's a simple tale of the little guy winning. It endures because it's a story about the nature of power itself. It shows that what looks like strength can be weakness, and what looks like weakness can be a decisive strength. It teaches us that victory is not about having the biggest sword, but about choosing the right battlefield. The most important giants we face are not the ones in front of us. They are the giants of convention, doubt, and fear within us. And to defeat them, we don't need to be bigger or stronger. We just need to see clearly, prepare diligently, and have the courage to be ourselves.